Okay, welcome back, everyone. Today we are discussing how culture embeds into trauma. Hello, Dr. Miller.
Good morning, Rebecca.
Good morning. So I think when it comes to culture, a lot of people might think who don't have some training or background in the mental health world and how culture embeds into it might think culture is ethnicity or someone's cultural background just means ethnicity, but it really can encompass a whole spectrum of things from age, sexuality, family systems, religion, beliefs, languages people speak. So it's really a long list that makes someone who they are, makes them a unique individual. And it would make a lot of sense that this would be embedded into the trauma work that maybe you do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think this is a really important, topic area. I look at it as the divergencies and convergencies of people's experience. So divergencies means things that they experience that are very unique to themselves that build off of the convergencies of existing in communities, in various groups, and it can include a lot of the things you've identified around ethnicity and, religious beliefs and communities that we grow up within family of origin, traditional practices, ways that we experience ourselves in the world with others, and we begin to accumulate some sense of who we are through all of those different experiences and relational dynamics that we will be engaging across the lifespan. And some of those are given to us, and some of those that we actually go and seek ourselves through various interests or ideas or groups of people that we are a part of. And so when I think about the idea of culture and what does that really mean, I mean, it is, ever expanding, it is exponential. It doesn't have like a limit on it. And yet there'll be some very defining factors at times for people in certain times in their life, right? And very important factors that they truly relate to in creating their identity, right? And that uniqueness of who they are, but also the connections they have to other people and those various experiences, traditions, experiences that might be shaped out for them and or they shape out with others, right? And that continues to expand across the lifespan.
Mm-hmm. And when you mentioned the idea of identity, so pieces of someone's culture is very, very pertinent to their identity and vice versa. It also influences the way that people just experience the world. And then by default, maybe how the expression of their trauma can be influenced by the different cultural pieces of their identity as well. When you're looking into the different cultural aspects of someone's identity and how that's important to maybe how you're conceptualizing how you might be able to guide and walk alongside them in their trauma work and healing, what types of things are you typically, or themes of things that you're considering?
Well, something that was taught to me a long time ago by an elder in the Indigenous community was to know your own identity. Know your own cultural kind of identity, upbringing, what have you related to and why. Because then you're not afraid to enter into the relationship with someone else. And you come with an identity, right, of some sort. So then you seek to understand someone else's identity, which means that willingness to enter into a relationship where they are the expert on their own experience. And you open up to understand them from, the moment they're brought into this world. There can be lots of traditional practices and cultural experiences that come with just being born into this world. And so when you develop those relationships with people you're working on behalf of, you're really looking to, again, be trauma focused. That trauma-oriented care or relational dynamic is to create safety and to seek to understand and to never know or think you know someone else's cultural experience. And so that means inviting in, right, some of those dialogues and creating the safety that is needed so they can bring who they are and that you would respect who they are and respect to understand that, not, bringing in your own cultural views and making those the norm. Because you actually have to be a little more vulnerable in that work where you don't know. You don't truly represent someone else's cultural experience. Even if you have some cultural, some experiences that are similar and or some cultural background that is similar or that somehow has been identified, it doesn't mean you know theirs. So you really have to get into that power with stance that you're willing to enter into that helping relationship and understand them and seek to understand, make time for it. Ask if there is something they need in relation to what would allow them to speak about their own identity in relation to who they are from a cultural oriented discussion.
And you mentioned in order to be open to seeing someone else's cultural view and how they see the world, it's really vital and important to be able to recognize and be aware of your own. And I think that's something that's really prevalent in the training that I'm doing right now, to kind of get to the point where you're at, is being very aware of what are our assumptions, what are our biases, what are pieces of our identity, how has it impacted us, so that we can be aware if it comes up when working with others and be able to monitor that in a way that won't be imposing our views and our beliefs on someone else, but allowing them to exist, noticing them, and then being open to someone else's as well.
And this is where there's a topic called unconscious bias. So there's conscious and unconscious. Lots of times we have unconscious bias. So we take in biases that we're not really aware of based on our own social location and our lived experience. And that might mean that we don't ask certain questions, or we ask certain questions. So we really have to work towards understanding where we're coming from, and then looking for feedback and allowing the person that we're working with or people that we're working with to guide us on things we may have left out or we may have asked in a certain way, because there may be a feedback loop that comes back to us that there is some sense of, are we discriminating? Are we being biased? You know, why didn't we ask a certain question? Why did we avoid something? Why didn't we allow the client or the person that we're working with or the group of people to be a voice of their own in relation to something that's been developed? And I think unconscious bias is really important to become aware of and to take a look at, are you, walking with something that could be discriminatory, or you become biased against a group of people or a person and their experience? And are you using good reflective relationships in supervision or with colleagues that are willing to, meet with you and talk about things that you might be uncomfortable asking, or you've received feedback? And what do you do with that feedback? Do you go into the community to better understand, some knowledge, some education, meeting with elders, meeting with the community itself, going to their own, if there's practices, traditional practices or experiences you could go to, take a course. There's all sorts of things we can do to open up our own understanding and become aware of where our biases live and are hidden.
Mm-hmm. And that piece of feedback is really crucial, I think, for trauma, not only trauma-informed care, but also culturally sensitive care, to be able to be open to have our clients or the people that we're in conversation with around their trauma, have they identified something about what we have done that is problematic for their healing, and are we able to receive that openly? And like you mentioned, being able to also consult with other people around us who are in the field, that can open our eyes to some of that hidden or blind assumptions or biases that may be impacting the work as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, when I was working on my first PhD in behavioral social sciences, I did a participatory action research project with people living with HIV, when one is positive, one is negative. And one of the things I learned a lot was through that piece of research and gathering people that had that lived experience, is they didn't want more professionals. They wanted their own people with lived experience to support them. And it eventually ended up forming into peer support model, and it's in the community still, and they're running it, and it's funded, and they've created more research. We did some more research here at Mount Royal University with some of the peer researchers from that community. And I learned a lot about stepping back, just getting out of the way. Sometimes around cultural awareness and cultural sensitivity, you learn to say less, and you let the people that have the lived experience, they become their own leaders, and they teach you things. And that means you're in it and you're sort of holding space to understand what they really need versus you think you know what they need. And so that research was good. After many, many years of being in the community and researching with them, I realized, and they were saying this, that they didn't need more academics or professionals cetera, et cetera. They just needed space for their own people to develop capacity. It's a very powerful teaching. And I've always taken that forward as a social scientist in research, but also in practice and education.
And I think that's another piece of cultural sensitivity right there, is the ability to take yourself out of the expert role and be open to learning from the people that we're walking alongside as well.
We are always a learner. And when we stop thinking that we probably will cause more harm than good.
Mm-hmm. Can you talk a little bit? I know we've been kind of having a discussion here around cultural sensitivity, but can you talk a little bit more about how trauma-informed care really intersects with culturally sensitive care?
Well, I think the importance, one of the premises of trauma-informed care, and this is always just a statement, like it's like a sentence that just needs to be sitting right there as soon as you think about it, is how do you create safety and that shared power stance so that people can come into whatever that helping relationship is or that venue, some kind of formal process, that you're really looking to understand and to learn about who they are. But in order to do that, you have to have safety in a relationship, right? Which means watching that power dynamic about being the expert in the experience. So I think this is where the intersect, right, of trauma-focused care and cultural sensitivity, and really looking at how those two are related. And really maybe they're sort of one in something bigger, that in order to really stand with another person and understand them in their cultural experience, you have to be willing to allow them to be the expert, right? And create that safety so their voice matters most and your voice stands with them.
Mm-hmm. When I think about sitting in a room with someone, discussing some of the most difficult things that had ever happened to me, it would be very important, I think, for them to understand me. And if I think someone couldn't understand me from where I'm coming from and meet me there, I don't think there would be a sense of safety, and I wouldn't feel safe and comforted to be having that conversation in the first place.
Yeah, and I think that's very important what you said, that we also have to be open to know that we may not be the right person or it may not be the right experience for people. And maybe to hear that becomes really important in that person's healing, that they can say that, that I don't feel this is a safe space for me. I don't feel that, you as a practitioner are the right person for me to be able to do my work with, and that we receive that, honor that. That's that kind of asserting, right, my self-efficacy, my right to be in this world, and to know that this experience doesn't work for me. And then we can sit in that and, do query around, is there anything I can do to change that? I honor what you're saying. And then look at how we can be an agency with them, that maybe there's some resources in the community. We can become active and see, are there barriers to other services that we could advocate for, removing barriers? Are there things that we can engage in a different way, in an indirect way, to be able to then understand what we weren't able to provide and link in other resources that are more appropriate for that person, or get out of the way totally and hear that feedback, and maybe that takes us into some other growth we need to do.
Mm-hmm. And like you mentioned, giving the opportunity to for a person that we're working with to speak up about, is there something about this relationship that isn't working, and giving them the opportunity to speak up about that, because a lot of the time, because there is often a power imbalance between therapist and client, kind of opening up the floor. Some people won't maybe be too comfortable to open up to the therapist and say, this isn't working for me, and here and this and this and this is why. Mm-hmm. So really allowing an opportunity to say, is there anything you're noticing about me that is not allowing you to be doing the work that you want to be doing as well?
Yeah, really opening that up to be vulnerable, right?
Mm-hmm.
And to allow that feedback then to guide you in your own need to, maybe look at things or develop some capacity, education. And I take that out of just the micro relationship and take it into even a more macro stance. In the classroom these days, you look at the diversity that comes with the students that are in a classroom. All those students have a lived experience, and their voices are more important than just the expert professor. because those voices have the lived experience of what they bring from the life they've lived. So how do we bring that all together? Sometimes in a classroom, you are as much a learner when you are the teacher, instructor, as you are the person that brings in, some kind of knowledge. You sit and learn. I think that's the beauty of the classroom, is the voices heard and how they process through information that you're bringing in to teach. They bring in insights from their own lived experience, from their grandparents' lived experience, from their cultural backgrounds. And it's so dynamic and it's very profound. And yet it takes a lot of work too to make sure everyone's voices are heard, that differences don't become wrong, and that we find respectful ways to be together and to honor what we can learn from students that are coming from across the world, right? Generations of living, and they're sitting right here in that microcosm of a classroom. And again, this type of thinking, cultural sensitive, trauma-focused education becomes pertinent so that we can all learn together, and because we live together in this world.
It sounds like within all of these roles, whether it's an educator or whether it's a clinician, a researcher, there's this responsibility and kind of a privilege even to invite vulnerability with the people that we're interacting with.
Yes, I'm glad you brought that up, because the responsibility of being a part of human relationships, especially when there's some sort of professional responsibility in it, every word that we say and every word that we don't say has to be thought through, with the responsibility to either hold space to help, heal, to educate with responsibility, to research with regard for people's right to be heard and to be a part of something in a respectful way. And that is a lot of responsibility. It's not just about showing up in a classroom or showing up at the office. It is understanding your true intentionality. And we are only humans in many ways, that we are going to flounder sometimes because life is big and heavy and stressful. And so that's okay too, to just name that. And maybe that's when we take a bit of a break, or we redirect how we do our work, or we seek some sort of consultation, supervision, insights from others to help us correct or be more mindful, right? Because it's a journey to become, trauma-focused and more culturally sensitive. It's an ongoing piece that, is there until the end of, whatever you'll be doing in your work. And there's still a responsibility even when you're done your work, because you hold the responsibility of people's lives or the minds of the young, and or knowledge building out that goes forward for generations. Every paper that's written is now a paper written, and every generation takes that knowledge. And it's very profound and powerful, and if done in a positive way, can be responsible for a lot of good. If not done in a positive way, can be responsible for a lot of harm.
And I think that's maybe where the importance of being critical about the research that's out there and what's in the media, as in a role of being an educator, being a professional, is really important, so that we're able to kind of filter out what is advocating for trauma-informed, what is advocating for culturally sensitive care, and how can we filter that to the people that we're interacting with as well. And I think an issue with what we're speaking about, with the hope that people can be vulnerable and people will be open to sharing, is that a lot of cultural memberships there's a lot of maybe stigma and cultural taboos around discussing trauma or being open and being vulnerable about mental health. Whether that's maybe a culture of masculinity, maybe some workplace cultures are not open to it, and there needs to be this image of being mentally strong, which means not showing emotions. Maybe certain religious groups don't or have some taboos around emotions and mental health. How can educators, researchers, mental health practitioners navigate and address some of these cultural nuances, and to ensure that clients and just people we interact with on a day-to-day basis can be vulnerable, and inviting them to do that?
I think one is to make sure you have safe relationships where you can seek some sort of understanding, and it is within the community of whatever the cultural experience and, the person that is coming into your work, or if you're in a classroom and you're teaching or you're doing researching, is the rule of thumb is go back to the community itself and let them be a part of whatever the practice is. So even if you're thinking more micro with a client you might be working with, you are working with the client to understand where they're at, right? In the meaning of their cultural experience, their lived experience. And is there something they need so that they can feel like they can, openly talk about something or talk about the stigma and bias and, what that experience is and where it holds them back. And is there any room in there, right, for some movement? And what would they need for that? And do you invite in other people that they need to talk to about, those concerns, or just recognize it's there? And then can you play a role in somehow creating a safer space or a process for them? And so again, it's a lot of that relational work. How do you enter into these relationships? What are your own biases? What's your awareness? What don't you know? And then how do you bring that in with intentionality, right, to work in the best interest of the person, people, group, community, etc. And then when there's gaps, and sometimes I say slow down too, there's sort of this real quick DoorDash type experience in, first world countries that let's get there as fast as we can and deliver it. And a lot of really good work is not delivered like that. It is a process, right, of developing safer relationships, of really creating spaces for people to find their strength, that empowerment piece, to self-determine. That takes time. And it takes, this idea of fostering really safe relationships. And sometimes it means stepping back a bit so you can really hear and let other people be seen in the process while you just observe more. And then maybe you get out of the way too, because you're not needed in the way you thought you would be needed. And that's a great thing to celebrate, that people become so empowered, so knowing their own right, their own self-determination. They don't need you in the way you might have first presented in that process. And you get the honor of knowing that's some pretty good work when someone finds their own real sense of self, or a group of people do, and you now are, uninvited, so to say, and their story becomes their story.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree with that kind of piece around this urge in human nature, I think, for immediate gratification. And I wonder how much that can exist in, especially trauma work, but just in the evolution of humans, I guess, and improvement of someone's mental well-being. Being able to connect is not always something, to connect and find yourself and improve ourselves is not something that can really happen overnight. And I wonder if with these marginalized groups, with these groups that have these cultural taboos within them, there's always this theme of connection. So I wonder about maybe peer support groups with people who understand and relate to each other's experiences, bringing those people together, if that can kind of appeal to that cultural sensitive care.
Yeah, I'm a big proponent for peer support, of course, because it came out of my my research for my PhD doctorate work, and I just saw the capacity building when a community begins to form and they begin to have some sort of shared experience, and the lived experience and that sense of agency, how they can create something that is so much bigger than the initial work you did. And then it goes on for generations. And I think of, the Calgary HIV Social Society, which has now been built off of some of the original work that I did. They're out there doing more research, more capacity building. We presented to the New York Health Department. I presented maybe for 20 minutes, and I just sat back and I let the peer researcher that lived with HIV, she spoke to so many things around building capacity. And I thought what an honor it was to be at this time with her and to hear her voice so strong and to be leading, right, people that, across the world, this information goes out and papers have been published, and how that now shapes out societies across the world and others, groups of people that are looking to have self-agency, right, to be able to be advocates for what they need and to bring that change that comes from empowerment. It's a profound part of, reshaping history. Groups of people bring the greatest change in society, not necessarily an institution. It's the people within that go out, and when they find their power, they will bring some sort of change that's needed.
And I think that's really powerful work that you're able to do in a qualitative capacity to share those voices and extend that knowledge in a way that does justice to the people who are sharing it, but also for people who might be able to relate. In a way, it's connecting people who don't necessarily have to be in the same place at the same time, but share the same experiences.
Yes. And I think when we are looking to go into some sort of trauma-focused care and cultural sensitivity is really at the beginning of all agendas, right? You come with that intentionality that you will only know what you know. And I always say, know what you know and know what you don't. And once you're in that space, it's a very peaceful type work because you know to step back, you know to just open up spaces, to have patience, you know, to create more of a barrier-free type work. And that means you get to honor and witness more than you come in as the expert all the time. You're an expert on something, but you are not an expert on many things.
It's very different from the place I'm at now. I think for me, it's the more I find out, the more I find out, the more I realize what I don't know.
Right.
So it's an endless cycle of I feel like I don't know anything. But it's growth, it's learning,
Yes,
it's a process.
it's about growth,
yeah.
right? And really, that is the goal of all education, is to continue to realize you only know what you know, and now you know something a bit more, and then you realize there's so much more to know.
Yeah, it's a process. But when we talk about culturally sensitive care, and also trauma-informed care and the intersection and being able to provide that inviting space to be vulnerable and seeking to understand someone, it seems like a standard that should exist especially in mental health care, in every office and setting. And also that if people knew about this intersection, people knew about this type of care, they would probably seek to want to have it every time they had a visit with a mental health professional. But there seems to be a gap where this isn't always happening. Either people aren't receiving it all the time or people aren't offering it all the time. What can we do to either start to address this gap, or why is that gap there?
Well, I think people are actively working right now to try and address this gap. You'll see it in educational institutions like Mount Royal University, where they have an equity, diversity, and inclusion sort of area practice, and that's a group of people that are constantly seeking to connect with educators and the university as a whole to be saying, are we doing enough? What aren't we doing? Why aren't we doing that? So there's this real reflective practice going on with an identification of the need to be more progressive. So you'll see in educational institutions, there's sort of this lead to say, when we look at everything through the eyes, if we call it EDI, we're looking at what isn't there. Not necessarily what is there. We see what's there. What isn't there? And that's a really important question. What isn't there? Even when I sit on the National Research Review team for some of the national grants that go out every year for the New Frontiers research, that's like new, leading edge. It's got risk and reward. We're looking at research proposals across Canada for all universities. We're always looking at who's included, who isn't. Why are we doing this research for this group of people? Have we even talked to the community? So I think right now there is a lot of progressive work being done, but there's a lot of work to be done. So if you take it back then into offices, what are we doing to formulate groups of people that will actually ask those questions? What isn't being done? Are we seeking feedback from our communities? Do we go to our young and ask them, how was your experience? What could we have done better? Certain diverse groups, asking them, what was it like to walk into our office? Did you feel like, you were received? Was there something missing? Was there something that didn't feel safe or respectful? What could we do different, right? To try and place our services, our, care in more of a culturally sensitive way. Do we bring the community itself in to educate us on what is needed in order to honor their culture, their history, right? Really looking at, are we reenacting some sort of colonization, some sort of power dynamic that would further marginalize a group of people, harm a group of people? Are we doing that in today's world and not aware of it?
So really advancing and filling this gap has a lot to do with this critical thinking and these asking of questions and really the feedback informed progression that's not from necessarily the people in the field, but actually back into the community.
Yes, back into the community. And let's say some of the feedback is we don't believe in mental health care. Then ask the question, if we could understand them better, how we could support you in whatever that care is for your community. Is there a link in? Maybe it's more just offering in some kind of education on one thing specific that is then in a collaborative way done with someone from their community that would be seen as a leader, right, an elder, and you're not really providing some sort of direct service, but maybe you're bringing a piece of education back to them. Or you're trying to honor something in their community, traditional practices that would help them as a community be strong. And you just sit alongside that and you attend some sort of feast, function, etc., where you show up to respect what that is.
Mm-hmm. I think, to use your words, Dr. Miller, this is also not a DoorDash experience. This is a very ongoing and, educating ourselves and each other and learning from one another in the community and in the professional practice. So it's not an overnight process, but really takes some time and intentionality to achieve in a culturally sensitive way.
Yes, yeah. And the commitment to that. And I think to, learn it's part of growing your whole of society, evolving as people. It takes a lifetime to evolve. And really, it takes a lifetime to develop yourself in capacity that you become more aware of the need, the urgency of actually culturally sensitive care responses and trauma-focused, which sits side by side. Mm-hmm. And that is the honoring of humanity and what humanity really needs.
Mm-hmm. Lifelong learners.
Yeah, lifelong learners, yes.
That's everything I have for you today. Thank you, Dr. Miller.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone, for listening.
Thank you.